The room was an opulent testament to wealth and power, its walls lined with polished mahogany bookshelves that housed rare first editions of literary masterpieces. A sprawling desk dominated the center of the space, cluttered not with papers, and a single crystal decanter half filled with amber liquid. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting golden streaks across the marble floors, illuminating every detail of Richard Hawthorne's domain. He sat there, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, his sharp jawline accentuated by the afternoon light. His piercing blue eyes scanned documents on one of the floating screens before him, though his mind seemed elsewhere, a restless energy simmering beneath his composed exterior. Richard Hawthorne was a man who had built his empire from scratch, rising from modest beginnings to become one of the most influential figures in biotech innovation. Yet, for all his success, he carried within him a void no amount of money could fill. It wasn't something he spoke about. It wasn't even something he consciously acknowledged most days, but it lingered nonetheless, a gnawing sense of emptiness that whispered to him during quiet moments like this, reminding him that no matter how many accolades adorned his office walls, they couldn't replace the warmth of genuine human connection. Over time, he had learned to mask this ache with arrogance, projecting an air of superiority that kept others at arm's length. After all, if people feared you, they couldn't hurt you, or so he believed. The intercom buzzed softly, interrupting his thoughts. "Mr. Hawthorne," came the voice of his assistant, crisp and professional. "Your delivery has arrived." He sighed audibly, leaning back in his leather chair. Another package, another trivial interruption. These days, everything felt trivial compared to the weight of his ambitions, or perhaps the weight of his solitude. Still, he pressed the button on the console embedded into his desk. "Send them in," he said curtly, already dismissing whoever it might be from his mind. Moments later, the door opened, and a young woman stepped inside. She couldn't have been more than 25, her dark hair tied loosely into a ponytail, strands escaping to frame her face. Her clothes were simple, a faded hoodie and jeans, but clean, practical. She held a small parcel in her hands, wrapped neatly in brown paper. There was nothing remarkable about her appearance, nothing that would suggest she belonged in this world of excess and privilege. And yet, there was something in her demeanor, an unspoken confidence, a quiet strength that caught Richard off guard, though he would never admit it. "Delivery for Mr. Hawthorne," she announced, her voice steady despite the obvious intimidation factor of standing in such an imposing environment. She approached the desk cautiously, placing the package down with care. As she did, their eyes met briefly, and Richard felt a flicker of curiosity, not because she was particularly striking, but because she didn't seem fazed by him. Most people wilted under his gaze, intimidated by his reputation or his icy demeanor. Not her. She stood tall, meeting his stare with an ease that bordered on defiance. "Sign here," she added, holding out a digital clipboard. Richard took it without looking at her, scrawling his signature with practiced indifference. He handed it back, expecting her to leave immediately. Instead, she hesitated, glancing around the room with what appeared to be genuine interest rather than awe. "This place is impressive," she remarked casually, her tone conversational rather than ingratiating. "I read an article recently about how design influences productivity. Did you know that certain colors can actually enhance cognitive function? Blue, for instance, promotes focus, while red increases urgency." Richard froze mid-motion, his pen still hovering over the clipboard. He looked up at her, his expression unreadable. Was she mocking him? No, her tone was sincere, almost innocent, but the absurdity of her comment struck him as laughable. Here she was, a mere delivery girl prattling on about neuroscience as if she knew anything about it. The irony wasn't lost on him. This was his field, after all. Biotechnology, cognitive enhancement, neural interfaces. He had spent years immersed in research far beyond anything someone like her could comprehend. "Fascinating," he drawled, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "And where exactly did you read this groundbreaking revelation?" She blinked, momentarily taken aback by his tone. Then, recovering quickly, she replied, "In a journal article, Nature Neuroscience, I think. Or maybe it was Scientific American. Honestly, I lose track sometimes. They publish so much good stuff." Her nonchalance only fueled his irritation. Who did she think she was, quoting scientific journals in his presence? He forced a tight smile, masking his annoyance behind a veneer of politeness. "Well, thank you for enlightening me," he said dryly. "Now if you'll excuse me, I have work to do," she nodded, unfazed by his dismissal. "Of course. Have a great day, Mr. Hawthorne." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving him alone once again. For several minutes after she left, Richard found himself staring at the closed door, replaying their brief exchange in his mind. Something about her stuck with him, not just her audacity, but the way she had spoken with such casual authority. It irked him, unsettled him even. He shook his head, dismissing the thought. She was nobody, a fleeting presence in his otherwise meticulously controlled life. And yet, as he returned to his work, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more to her than met the eye. Little did he know that seemingly insignificant encounter would set into motion a chain of events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about himself and the world around him. Richard Hawthorne's journey to the top had been anything but easy, though few people knew the truth behind his carefully constructed facade. Born into a family of modest means, he grew up in a small town where opportunities were scarce and dreams often went unfulfilled. His father, a factory worker with calloused hands and a weary spirit, spent long hours laboring to provide for the family, while his mother juggled odd jobs to make ends meet. They weren't poor by any extreme measure, but they lived paycheck to paycheck, their lives dictated by necessity rather than choice. From an early age, Richard understood that survival required sacrifice and ambition. He was a bright child, excelling in school despite the lack of resources available to him. Books became his refuge, offering glimpses of worlds far beyond the confines of his hometown. Science fascinated him most. The idea that knowledge could unlock solutions to humanity's greatest challenges ignited a fire within him. Yet, even as he dreamed of making a difference, he couldn't escape the harsh realities of his environment. Bullied for being too smart or different, he learned to bury his emotions beneath layers of stoicism, using sarcasm and wit as shields against vulnerability. By the time he graduated high school, Richard had earned scholarships to prestigious universities, leaving his family behind with promises of a better future. But success came at a cost. The relentless pursuit of excellence left little room for personal relationships. Friends drifted away, unable to keep up with his intensity. Romantic partners found him distant, emotionally unavailable. Even his parents, proud as they were of his achievements, struggled to connect with the man he had become, a stranger, cloaked in ambition and driven by an insatiable hunger for validation. Over the years, Richard amassed wealth and accolades, building a biotech empire that revolutionized healthcare. Yet, no matter how many awards adorned his office walls or how many zeros appeared in his bank account, he remained haunted by a profound sense of emptiness. Success had given him power, but it hadn't healed the wounds of his childhood. It hadn't filled the void left by absent friendships, strained familial ties, or the love he yearned for but refused to seek. Instead, he channeled his pain into work, convincing himself that productivity was the ultimate measure of worth. His arrogance wasn't born out of malice, but insecurity, a defense mechanism honed over decades of proving himself to a world that once doubted him. To those who crossed his path, he seemed untouchable, invincible. But deep down, Richard was a man searching for meaning, though he would never admit it aloud. He masked his loneliness with cynicism, dismissing others' struggles as trivial compared to his own. And so when Sophia Carter walked into his office that day, he saw only what he wanted to see: a delivery girl, inconsequential and forgettable. What he failed to recognize was the potential for connection, the possibility that someone like her might hold the key to unlocking parts of himself he had long buried. Sophia Carter's story began in a cramped apartment on the outskirts of the city, where the hum of traffic outside blended with the muffled sounds of neighbors arguing through thin walls. Raised by a single mother who worked double shifts as a nurse, Sophia learned early on the value of resilience. Her childhood was marked by scarcity, hand-me-down clothes, second-hand textbooks, and meals stretched thin to last the week, but it was also filled with moments of quiet joy. Her mother, though exhausted from endless hours at the hospital, always made time to read bedtime stories or help Sophia with her homework. Those evenings, bathed in the soft glow of a bedside lamp, planted the seeds of curiosity that would later blossom into a passion for learning. School became Sophia's sanctuary, a place where she could lose herself in the wonders of science and discovery. Teachers noticed her brilliance, encouraging her to aim high despite the odds stacked against her. She devoured books on biology, chemistry, and medicine, marveling at the intricacies of the human body and the mysteries of disease. By the time she reached high school, her dream was clear. She wanted to be a doctor, not just to heal but to innovate, to find cures for illnesses that plagued underserved communities like hers. But dreams didn't come cheap. College tuition loomed large, an insurmountable barrier for someone in her position. Determined not to give up, Sophia took on multiple part-time jobs, juggling coursework with late-night shifts delivering packages for a local courier service. Each paycheck brought her one step closer to her goal, though the sacrifices weighed heavily. Sleepless nights became the norm. Caffeine, her constant companion. Friends drifted away, unable to relate to the pressures she faced. Loneliness crept in, but Sophia refused to let it consume her. She clung to the belief that hard work would eventually pay off, that someday her efforts would lead to something meaningful. Despite the hardships, Sophia retained a remarkable sense of optimism. She believed in the goodness of people even when life tested that belief. Her kindness wasn't performative, it was instinctual, a reflection of the values instilled in her by her mother. When customers snapped at her during deliveries or dismissed her with barely a glance, she chose not to take it personally. Instead, she reminded herself that everyone carried burdens invisible to the naked eye. That perspective allowed her to approach the world with empathy, seeing beyond surface-level judgments to the humanity beneath. On the day she delivered the package to Richard Hawthorne's office, Sophia wasn't thinking about impressing him or proving her worth. She simply wanted to share a tidbit of knowledge she had recently discovered, hoping it might spark a conversation. Little did she know, her casual comment about neuroscience would plant a seed of intrigue in Richard's mind, a seed that would grow into something neither of them anticipated. It happened weeks after their initial meeting on a rainy afternoon. That turned the city streets into shimmering mirrors of neon lights. Sophia was en route to another delivery when her phone buzzed with an urgent notification, a rerouted order for Richard Hawthorne's office. Groaning inwardly, she adjusted her route, cursing the unpredictable nature of her job. Still, professionalism won out, and she arrived at his building drenched but determined to complete the task. As she entered the lobby, she noticed the tense atmosphere immediately. Employees scurried about, whispering anxiously. Curiosity piqued, Sophia approached the receptionist. "Is everything okay?" she asked, trying to sound nonchalant. The receptionist hesitated before responding. "Mr. Hawthorne, he's having some kind of reaction. They're calling paramedics, but traffic is terrible because of the storm." Sophia's heart skipped a beat. Without thinking, she rushed toward the elevators, ignoring the protests of security guards. When she reached Richard's office, the scene was chaotic. He lay slumped in his chair, his face pale and clammy, struggling to breathe. His assistant hovered nearby, panic-stricken and unsure of what to do. "I'm pre-med," Sophia announced firmly, stepping forward. "Let me help." For a moment, everyone froze, staring at her skeptically. But desperation outweighed doubt, and they stepped aside, allowing her to take charge. With practiced precision, Sophia assessed Richard's condition. His symptoms pointed to anaphylaxis, a severe allergic reaction likely triggered by something he had eaten. Acting quickly, she retrieved an EpiPen from the office first aid kit and administered the injection, monitoring his vitals closely until his breathing stabilized. When paramedics finally arrived, Richard was conscious but shaken. As they loaded him onto a stretcher, his gaze locked onto Sophia, gratitude mingling with disbelief in his eyes. "You saved my life," he murmured weakly, his voice hoarse. She offered a small smile, brushing off the praise. "Just doing my job," she replied softly. But inside, she felt a flicker of pride, not for the act itself, but for the reminder that her education, however incomplete, had already begun to make a difference. That night, as Richard lay in a hospital bed, his mind replayed the events over and over. How had she known exactly what to do? Who was this woman who carried herself with such calm authority? Questions swirled in his head, gnawing at his curiosity. For the first time in years, he found himself genuinely intrigued by someone outside his usual circle of influence. Meanwhile, Sophia returned home exhausted but exhilarated. Saving Richard's life had reaffirmed her purpose, reminding her why she endured the grueling hours and endless sacrifices. Yet, as she drifted off to sleep, she couldn't shake the image of his piercing blue eyes or the realization that there was more to him than the arrogant billionaire she had initially dismissed. Unbeknownst to either of them, their paths were now irrevocably intertwined, setting the stage for a journey neither could have foreseen. In the days following the incident, Richard found himself unable to shake the image of Sophia Carter from his mind. Her calm demeanor during the crisis, her precise actions, and the quiet authority with which she had taken control, it all lingered like an unsolved puzzle, gnawing at his curiosity. He had always prided himself on being a man of logic, someone who approached problems with analytical precision. Yet, here was a situation that defied easy explanation. How could someone who delivered packages for a living possess such advanced medical knowledge? And why hadn't he seen it before? At first, he tried to dismiss his fascination as mere gratitude, a natural response to having his life saved. But the more he thought about it, the less convincing that explanation became. There was something about her that intrigued him on a deeper level, something that went beyond the superficial roles they played in each other's lives. She wasn't just a delivery girl. She was a mystery waiting to be unraveled, determined. To satisfy his curiosity, Richard began investigating Sophia discreetly. He started small, asking his assistant to pull up basic information about her. Employment records, educational background, anything that might shed light on who she really was. What he discovered only deepened the enigma. According to public records, Sophia was indeed employed by the courier service, but she was also enrolled as a full-time student at a nearby university, majoring in pre-medical sciences. Her academic transcripts were nothing short of extraordinary, filled with top marks and glowing recommendations from professors. It seemed she wasn't just studying medicine, she was excelling at it. But what struck Richard most was the financial strain evident in her records. Despite her brilliance, she was struggling to make ends meet, working long hours to cover tuition fees and living expenses. The contrast between her circumstances and her achievements was staggering. Here was someone with immense potential, yet burdened by the very system he had exploited to climb the ladder of success. For the first time in years, Richard felt a pang of guilt, a foreign sensation that unsettled him. Driven by a mix of admiration and remorse, he decided to take matters into his own hands. Using his influence, he arranged for anonymous scholarships and grants to be awarded to Sophia, ensuring she wouldn't have to worry about finances for the remainder of her studies. It wasn't altruism, not entirely. Part of him wanted to see how far she could go to witness the impact she might have on the world. Another part, a quieter, more vulnerable part, wanted to prove to himself that he could still do good, even if no one ever knew it was him. For Sophia, the sudden easing of her financial burdens came as both a relief and a source of confusion. One day, she received an email notifying her of a prestigious scholarship she hadn't applied for. The next week, another grant appeared in her account, covering her remaining tuition fees. At first, she assumed it was some kind of clerical error or bureaucratic oversight, but as the pattern continued, she realized someone was deliberately intervening on her behalf. The realization filled her with conflicting emotions. On one hand, she was grateful for the reprieve. The constant stress of balancing work and school had taken its toll. leaving her physically and emotionally drained. With these unexpected funds, she could finally focus on her studies without worrying about making rent or skipping meals. On the other hand, the anonymity of the benefactor troubled her. Who would give so generously without seeking recognition? And why had they chosen her? Her suspicions eventually led her back to Richard Hawthorne. Though she had no concrete evidence, something about the timing of the gifts and his reaction during their last encounter made her suspect he might be involved. The thought unnerved her. Accepting help from someone like him felt wrong, almost like compromising her independence. She had always prided herself on forging her own path, refusing to rely on anyone else. Yet here she was, benefiting from an act of generosity she couldn't fully understand. Determined to confront him, Sophia waited until her next scheduled delivery to his office. When she arrived, she bypassed the receptionist and marched straight to his door, knocking firmly. Richard looked up from his desk, surprised to see her standing there. "Sophia," he said, his tone neutral but tinged with curiosity. "What do I owe this unexpected visit?" She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "I think you know why I'm here," she replied, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling beneath the surface. "Someone's been paying my bills. My tuition, my rent, everything. I want to know if it's you." Richard hesitated, caught off guard by her directness. He had expected her to remain oblivious, perhaps forever. Now, faced with her piercing gaze, he felt a flicker of vulnerability, a rare moment of exposure. "Why does it matter?" he countered, deflecting the question. "Isn't it better to focus on your education than worry about where the money comes from?" "It matters because I don't accept charity," she shot back, her frustration spilling over. "Especially not from someone who looks down on people like me. If it is you, I need to know why. Are you trying to buy my silence, my gratitude? Or are you just bored and decided to play philanthropist for kicks?" Her words hit him like a punch to the gut, forcing him to confront the arrogance he had displayed during their first meeting. He opened his mouth to defend himself, then stopped, realizing she was right. His initial judgment of her had been unfair, rooted in prejudice rather than fact. Slowly, he leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. "You're right," he admitted, surprising even himself. "I underestimated you, and for that, I apologize. Yes, it was me. But it wasn't about charity or boredom. I saw your potential, Sophia. I wanted to give you the chance to succeed without being held back by circumstances beyond your control." The sincerity in his voice disarmed her, softening the anger she had carried into the room. Still, she remained cautious. "And what do you expect in return?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. "Because nothing comes for free, Mr. Hawthorne." "Nothing," he replied simply, "except maybe a conversation now and then, someone, to challenge me, remind me that the world isn't as black and white as I sometimes pretend it is." His honesty caught her off guard, revealing a side of him she hadn't anticipated. Beneath the polished exterior and sharp tongue lay a man, grappling with his own insecurities, searching for meaning in a life defined by achievement. For the first time, she saw him not as the arrogant billionaire, but as a human being flawed and complex like anyone else. Their conversations began tentatively, awkward at first, but gradually growing more natural. Richard invited Sophia to join him for coffee after her deliveries, using the pretense of discussing business opportunities to justify their meetings. In reality, he was fascinated by her perspective, eager to learn about the world through her eyes. She spoke passionately about her studies, sharing insights from her research and recounting stories from her clinical rotations. Each interaction left him humbled, reminded of the privilege he often took for granted. Sophia, too, found herself drawn to Richard in ways she hadn't expected. Beneath his polished veneer, she discovered a man wrestling with loneliness and regret. He listened intently when she spoke, asking thoughtful questions that showed genuine interest. Over time, she began to see glimpses of the person he might have been before success hardened him, a dreamer, much like herself. Their dynamic evolved organically, shifting from wary acquaintances to tentative friends. They debated philosophy, science, and ethics, challenging each other's viewpoints while finding common ground in their shared desire to make a difference. Richard encouraged her ambitions, offering guidance based on his own experiences, while Sophia pushed him to confront his biases and reconsider his assumptions about the world. Yet, despite the growing bond between them, both remained guarded, aware of the societal chasm that separated their lives. Sophia worried about becoming dependent on his support, while Richard feared losing the fragile connection they had built. Neither was ready to acknowledge the deeper feelings simmering beneath the surface, though neither could deny their presence either. As weeks turned into months, the dynamic between Richard and Sophia shifted from cautious friendship to a partnership rooted in mutual respect and admiration. What began as sporadic coffee meetings evolved into regular discussions about science, ethics, and the future of medicine. Richard, who had once dismissed the struggles of those outside his elite circle, found himself captivated by Sophia's vision for healthcare, a system accessible to all, regardless of socioeconomic status. Her idealism challenged his pragmatism, forcing him to reconsider long-held beliefs about the limits of philanthropy and innovation. Sophia, in turn, discovered a side of Richard she hadn't anticipated. Beneath his polished exterior lay a man burdened by guilt and regret, someone who yearned to leave a legacy beyond wealth and power. His willingness to listen, to truly engage with her ideas, spoke volumes about his desire for redemption. Together, they began brainstorming ways to merge their strengths, Richard's resources and influence paired with Sophia's groundbreaking research. It was during one such conversation that Sophia revealed a project she had been working on in secret, a revolutionary approach to treating a rare genetic disorder that disproportionately affected low-income communities. The disorder, known as hypoxia-induced neurodegeneration, (IgND), caused progressive brain damage due to oxygen deprivation at birth. While relatively uncommon, its effects were devastating, leaving patients with severe cognitive impairments and shortened lifespans. Existing treatments were prohibitively expensive and often ineffective, making it a neglected area of medical research. Sophia, however, had developed a novel gene editing technique that showed promise in early trials. By targeting specific mutations responsible for the condition, her method aimed to halt or even reverse the progression of the disease. Richard listened intently as she explained the science behind her work, his eyes lighting up with a mixture of awe and excitement. "This could change everything," he murmured, leaning forward in his chair. "Why haven't you published this yet, or sought funding?" Sophia hesitated, her enthusiasm dimming slightly. "I've tried," she admitted, "but without connections or backing, it's hard to get anyone to take me seriously. Most researchers are skeptical because I'm still a student, and the institutions I've approached either don't have the resources or aren't interested in taking risks." Her frustration was palpable, but so was her determination. She refused to let setbacks deter her, pouring every spare moment into refining her research. Seeing the fire in her eyes, Richard made a decision. "Let me help you," he said firmly. "Not just financially, I mean fully. We'll assemble a team, secure lab space, and ensure your work gets the attention it deserves." For a moment, Sophia was speechless. The offer was generous, almost overwhelming, but it came with strings attached, strings she wasn't sure she was ready to accept. "Why are you doing this?" she asked finally, her voice tinged with suspicion. "What do you stand to gain?" Richard met her gaze steadily, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "Maybe I want to believe in something again," he replied softly. "Or maybe I see a part of myself in you, the part that refuses to give up, no matter how impossible things seem. Either way, I think your work has the potential to save lives. Isn't that reason enough?" His words struck a chord, resonating with her own motivations. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that accepting his help might compromise her independence. Yet, as much as she wanted to resist, she knew she couldn't achieve her goals alone. With a reluctant nod, she agreed to let him assist, setting clear boundaries to ensure their collaboration remained professional. Their partnership quickly bore fruit, transforming Sophia's theoretical research into tangible progress. Richard used his network to secure state-of-the-art lab facilities and recruit top scientists to support her work. He also leveraged his media connections to generate buzz around the project, positioning Sophia as a rising star in the field of genetic medicine. For the first time, doors that had once been closed to her swung open, granting her access to resources and opportunities she had only dreamed of. Yet, success brought its own set of challenges. As Sophia's profile grew, so did scrutiny. Critics questioned whether a young, inexperienced researcher should be entrusted with such groundbreaking work. Some accused Richard of using her as a pawn to enhance his public image, dismissing her contributions as mere extensions of his influence. The pressure mounted, testing both their resolve and their relationship. One particularly grueling day, after enduring hours of hostile questioning during a conference panel, Sophia retreated to a quiet corner of the venue, tears threatening to spill over. Richard found her there, slumped in a chair, her usual confidence replaced by raw vulnerability. "They don't believe in me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They think I'm a fraud riding on your coattails." He knelt beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Don't let them get to you," he urged gently. "You know the truth, that this is your work, your brilliance. Let the results speak for themselves." But Sophia shook her head, pulling away slightly. "It's not just about proving myself anymore. Every step forward feels like 2 steps back. Sometimes I wonder if I'm cut out for this." Her admission startled him. In all their interactions, she had always projected strength, resilience. To see her doubt herself now was heartbreaking and sobering. "You're stronger than you realize," he said firmly, "and you're not alone. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." His unwavering support reignited her determination, reminding her why she had embarked on this journey in the first place. Slowly, she regained her composure, vowing to push through the obstacles ahead. As their professional collaboration deepened, so too did their emotional connection. Late nights spent poring over data and strategizing next steps brought them closer, blurring the lines between mentorship and companionship. They shared stories of their pasts, revealing vulnerabilities they rarely exposed to others. Richard spoke candidly about his childhood, the sacrifices his parents had made, and the loneliness that had haunted him throughout his life. Sophia, in turn, opened up about her mother's sacrifices, the sacrifices she herself had made, and the fear of failure that sometimes kept her awake at night. These conversations forged a bond that transcended their differences, creating a foundation of trust and understanding. Yet, neither was ready to label what they shared. Both were guarded, wary of letting emotions cloud their judgment. Richard feared losing the respect he had earned, while Sophia worried about becoming dependent on someone whose world was so vastly different from hers. Despite these reservations, moments of intimacy crept in unexpectedly. A lingering glance across a crowded room, a gentle touch on the arm during a tense meeting, a shared laugh over a poorly timed coffee spill. Each interaction carried an undercurrent of something unspoken, a spark neither dared to acknowledge fully. Amidst their growing closeness, shadows loomed on the horizon. Rumors began circulating within the scientific community about corporate interest in Sophia's research. A major pharmaceutical company, Geneva, had taken notice of her work and was rumored to be preparing a lucrative offer. Known for its aggressive acquisition tactics, Geneva had a reputation for prioritizing profit over patient welfare, a fact that alarmed both Richard and Sophia. When representatives from the company approached Sophia directly, offering substantial funding in exchange for exclusive rights to her research, tensions reached a boiling point. Sophia rejected the offer outright, unwilling to compromise her principles, but the encounter left her shaken, highlighting the ethical dilemmas inherent in medical innovation. Richard, meanwhile, recognized the threat posed by Geneva. Not only did they represent a danger to Sophia's integrity, but they also embodied the very system he had profited from, a system he now sought to dismantle. Determined to protect her work, he vowed to fight back, even if it meant risking his own empire. Geneva-Tech's interest in Sophia's research didn't fade after her initial rejection. If anything, it intensified. The company was notorious for its relentless pursuit of intellectual property, often employing underhanded tactics to secure what it wanted. When diplomacy failed, they resorted to intimidation, leveraging their vast resources to pressure innovators into compliance. For Sophia, this meant a barrage of legal notices, thinly veiled threats, and attempts to discredit her work through smear campaigns in scientific journals. Richard watched with growing unease as the situation escalated. He had always known Genovatech's CEO, Victor Langston, from industry circles, a ruthless businessman who thrived on exploiting loopholes and crushing competition. What Richard hadn't anticipated was how personally invested Langston would become in acquiring Sophia's research. It wasn't just about profit anymore. It was about control and perhaps revenge. Years earlier, Richard had outmaneuvered Langston in a high-stakes merger deal, humiliating him publicly. Now Langston saw an opportunity to settle the score by targeting the one thing Richard seemed to care about most, Sophia. One evening, as Richard reviewed documents related to Genovatech's latest maneuvers, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. The number was unfamiliar, but something about it felt ominous. Against his better judgment, he answered. "Hawthorne?" came a cold, clipped voice on the other end. "It was Langston." "Victor," Richard replied, his tone equally frosty. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "I think you know why I'm calling," Langston said, skipping pleasantries. "Your little protégé is causing quite a stir." "Impressive. Work, I'll admit. But she's playing in waters far deeper than she realizes." Richard's jaw tightened. "Leave her out of this, Victor. This isn't about her, it's about me." Langston chuckled darkly. "Oh, but it is about her. You've made your feelings clear, haven't you? She's not just another project for you, is she?" "No, she's something more. And that makes her vulnerable, very vulnerable." The implication hung heavy in the air, sending a chill down Richard's spine. He knew exactly what Langston was capable of: blackmail, sabotage, even physical harm. If he targeted Sophia, there would be no limit to the damage he could inflict. "You won't touch her," Richard growled, his voice low and dangerous. "If you so much as look at her sideways, I'll destroy you." Langston laughed again, unfazed. "Big words, Richard, but we both know how this game works. You can't protect her forever. Sooner or later, she'll have to choose. Stand with you or against you." The line went dead, leaving Richard seething with anger and fear. He stared at the phone in his hand, his mind racing. Langston's threat wasn't empty posturing. It was a declaration of war. And Sophia was caught in the crossfire. Unaware of the full extent of the danger looming over her, Sophia continued to pour her energy into her research. The stress of battling Genovatech's advances weighed heavily on her, but she refused to let them dictate her path. Her resolve only strengthened when preliminary results from her clinical trials showed remarkable progress. Patients who had once faced bleak prognoses were showing signs of improvement, their conditions stabilizing in ways previously thought impossible. Yet, despite the promising data, doubts crept in. Was she being naive to think she could take on a corporate giant like Genovatech? Could she really trust Richard to shield her from the fallout? These questions gnawed at her, especially as rumors spread about Richard's involvement in her work. Some accused him of manipulating her, using her brilliance to further his own agenda. Others speculated that their partnership was less professional and more personal, a claim that stung because it hit uncomfortably close to the truth. One afternoon, during a particularly heated argument with Richard, Sophia finally voiced her fears. "What happens if this all falls apart?" she demanded, pacing back and forth in his office. "If Genovatech wins, if they expose us, where does that leave me? Where does that leave us?" Richard stood silently, watching her with a mixture of frustration and admiration. "We don't give them the chance to win," he said firmly. "I won't let them take this away from you, not after everything you've sacrificed." "But at what cost?" she shot back, her voice rising. "You're putting yourself on the line for me, risking your reputation, your business. Why? Because you feel guilty? Because you want to prove something? Or because you care about me?" Her question caught him off guard, forcing him to confront emotions he had been avoiding. Yes, he cared about her, more than he should, more than he was prepared to admit. But acknowledging it aloud felt like stepping onto unstable ground, where logic gave way to vulnerability. "I care about what you represent," he hedged, though the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Your work has the potential to change lives. That's worth fighting for." Sophia stopped pacing, turning to face him. Her expression softened, though her eyes remained sharp. "And what about us?" she asked quietly. "What are we fighting for?" The room fell silent, the weight of her question hanging between them. For a moment, neither spoke, the air thick with unspoken truths. Then, slowly, Richard stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But whatever it is, I'm not ready to let it go." His honesty disarmed her, breaking down the wall she had built to protect herself. Without thinking, she reached out, her hand brushing against his. The contact sent a jolt through both of them, a spark that couldn't be ignored. For the first time, they allowed themselves to acknowledge the depth of their connection, not just as collaborators, but as two people drawn together by shared dreams and vulnerabilities. Just as their bond began to solidify, a new threat emerged, one that struck closer to home. One of Richard's closest advisors, Marcus Hale, revealed himself to be a double agent working for Geneva Tech. Using his position within Hawthorne Industries, Marcus had been feeding Langston sensitive information about Sophia's research and Richard's strategies to counteract Geneva Tech's advances. The betrayal hit Richard hard. Marcus had been a trusted confidant for years, someone he had relied on to navigate the complexities of running a global empire. To discover that Marcus had been undermining him all along shattered any remaining illusions Richard had about loyalty and trust. When confronted, Marcus didn't deny his actions. Instead, he justified them with chilling pragmatism. "You left me no choice, Richard," he said calmly, as if discussing a business deal rather than treachery. "Langston offered me a future you never could, a seat at the table, real power. You may have wealth, but you've always been too idealistic to wield it effectively. I saw an opportunity to align myself with someone who understands the rules of the game." Richard listened in stunned silence, his fists clenched at his sides. "You sold me out, for money, for power, after everything I've done for you?" Marcus shrugged, unmoved by Richard's outrage. "Survival isn't pretty, Richard. You should know that better than anyone." The confrontation ended with Marcus walking away, leaving Richard to grapple with the implications of his betrayal. Not only had Marcus compromised their efforts to protect Sophia's research, but he had also exposed weaknesses in Richard's operation that could be exploited further. Worse still, the breach forced Richard to question who else in his inner circle might be working against him. With time running out and Geneva Tech closing in, Richard made a decision that would alter the course of their battle and his life. Knowing that Langston wouldn't stop until he had complete control over Sophia's research, Richard devised a bold plan. He would step away from his company entirely, relinquishing his role as CEO to focus solely on protecting Sophia and her work. The announcement sent shockwaves through the business world. Analysts speculated wildly about the reasons behind his sudden departure, while competitors scrambled to fill the void left by his absence. To those who knew him, it seemed incomprehensible that Richard Hawthorne, a man defined by ambition and dominance, would willingly walk away from the empire he had built. For Sophia, the news came as a shock. "You're giving up everything?" she asked incredulously, her voice trembling with emotion. "For me?" "It's not just for you," Richard replied, his tone resolute. "It's for what you represent, the belief that science can serve humanity, not exploit it. I've spent my life chasing success, but I've realized it means nothing without purpose. You've shown me that." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes as she processed his words. In that moment, she understood the magnitude of his sacrifice and the depth of his commitment to her cause. Whatever doubt she had harbored about his intentions melted away, replaced by a profound sense of gratitude and love. Together, they redoubled their efforts, determined to see Sophia's research through to completion. With Richard's guidance and unwavering support, they managed to secure independent funding, bypassing Geneva Tech's influence entirely. The final phase of clinical trials began, bringing them closer than ever to achieving their goal. The culmination of Sophia's research arrived with a mixture of triumph and exhaustion. After months of relentless effort, battling corporate interference, overcoming skepticism, and enduring personal sacrifices, the final results of her clinical aid. Trials were published in one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world. The findings were nothing short of groundbreaking. Her gene editing technique had successfully halted the progression of hypoxia-induced neurodegeneration, (SHI-ND), in nearly 90% of trial participants, with some showing signs of partial recovery. For families who had once faced despair, the treatment offered hope, a chance at a future they never thought possible. News of the breakthrough spread like wildfire, catapulting Sophia into the global spotlight. Interviews poured in from major news outlets, universities extended honorary degrees, and humanitarian organizations lauded her as a pioneer in accessible healthcare innovation. Yet, amidst the accolades, Sophia remained grounded, acutely aware of the journey that had brought her here. She knew she hadn't achieved this alone. Every step of the way, Richard had stood by her side, shielding her from threats and amplifying her voice when others sought to silence it. For Richard, watching Sophia accept recognition for her work filled him with a sense of pride he hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't just about seeing his investment pay off. It was about witnessing someone he deeply cared for achieve her dreams. But more than that, it was about redemption. By stepping away from Hawthorne Industries, he had stripped himself of the trappings of wealth and power that once defined him. In doing so, he had rediscovered a part of himself long buried beneath ambition and arrogance, the man who believed in making a difference. Still, the road ahead wasn't without challenges. Geneva Tech, though thwarted in their attempts to acquire Sophia's research, continued to cast a shadow over their victory. Legal battles lingered, dragging both Richard and Sophia into courtrooms, where they fought to ensure the treatment remained affordable and accessible to those who needed it most. Each hearing was a test of endurance, forcing them to confront the systemic inequalities that had plagued healthcare for decades. Yet, through it all, they stood united, drawing strength from each other and the shared purpose that bound them. One evening, following a particularly grueling day of testimony, Richard and Sophia found themselves alone on a rooftop overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered with lights, a stark contrast to the quiet intimacy of the moment. They sat side by side, their shoulders brushing lightly as they gazed out at the horizon. Neither spoke for a long time, the weight of everything they had endured hanging unspoken between them. Finally, Sophia broke the silence. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't delivered that package to your office?" she asked softly, her voice tinged with curiosity. Richard chuckled, shaking his head. "I try not to think about it," he admitted, "because then I'd have to imagine a life without you in it, and I don't want to do that." His words caught her off guard, sending a flutter of warmth through her chest. She turned to look at him, studying his profile in the dim light. "You've changed so much since we met," she said after a pause. "I never thought I'd see the day when Richard Hawthorne walked away from his empire." He glanced at her, his expression softening. "And I never thought I'd meet someone like you," he replied earnestly. "Someone who reminds me why I started down this path in the first place. Someone who makes me want to be better." Sophia felt her breath catch, her heart pounding in her chest. She had known for some time that her feelings for him ran deeper than friendship or professional admiration. Yet hearing him speak so openly stirred something within her, a longing she had tried to suppress but could no longer deny. "I'm scared," she confessed quietly, her voice trembling. "Scared of letting myself care too much, of depending on someone again. Life has taught me that people leave, Richard, even the ones you love." He reached out, taking her hand. In his touch was gentle, reassuring. "I won't leave," he promised, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "Not unless you ask me to. But I need you to know something. I've fallen in love with you, Sophia. Not because of what you've accomplished, but because of who you are. Your strength, your compassion, your unwavering belief in a better world. You've changed me in ways I didn't think were possible." Tears welled in her eyes as she absorbed his words, the truth of them resonating deep within her soul. For so long, she had guarded her heart, afraid of being hurt again. But looking at Richard now, she realized that love wasn't about avoiding pain. It was about finding someone worth risking everything for. "I love you too," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. more than I ever thought I could. Love anyone. In that moment, the barriers between them dissolved completely. They embraced, holding on to each other as if afraid to let go. The city buzzed below them, oblivious to the quiet revolution taking place on that rooftop. A declaration of love born not out of convenience, but out of mutual growth and sacrifice. With their relationship firmly established, Richard and Sophia turned their attention to the future. Together, they founded a non-profit organization dedicated to advancing equitable healthcare solutions, using the proceeds from Sophia's patented treatment to fund research initiatives in underserved communities. Their mission was simple, yet profound: to bridge the gap between scientific innovation and accessibility, ensuring that no one was left behind. Richard, once consumed by the pursuit of wealth, found fulfillment in giving back. He used his influence to advocate for policy changes, challenging governments and corporations to prioritize patient welfare over profit. Sophia, meanwhile, became a beacon of inspiration for aspiring scientists and activists, proving that brilliance combined with determination could overcome even the greatest obstacles. Their partnership extended beyond work, evolving into a harmonious blend of love and collaboration. They traveled together, exploring cultures and perspectives that enriched their understanding of the world. They argued passionately about ethics and philosophy, pushing each other to think critically and grow. And they laughed freely, finding joy in the small moments that made life beautiful. Yet, perhaps the most significant change was internal. Both Richard and Sophia had entered their journey carrying burdens, his rooted in loneliness and regret, hers in fear and self-doubt. Through their connection, they had healed parts of themselves they hadn't realized were broken. They had learned to trust again, to open their hearts to the possibility of love and vulnerability. And years later, as they stood together at a conference honoring pioneers in medical science, Sophia couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. From that fateful delivery to the creation of a movement that had transformed countless lives, their story was a testament to the power of resilience, partnership, and purpose. As the audience erupted in applause, Richard leaned over and whispered in her ear, "We did it," she smiled, squeezing his hand tightly. "No, Richard, you did it. You believed in me when no one else would. And because of that, we've been able to change the world." He shook his head, his eyes shining with emotion. "We changed each other," he corrected gently. "That's what matters most." And as they walked off stage hand in hand, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, they knew one thing for certain: their journey was far from over. Together, they had built a legacy, not just of achievement, but of love, courage, and the unwavering belief that even the smallest actions could spark monumental change.